are listening to India Chalo, a podcast where travelers relive their journeys across India. From the Himachali orchids and the majestic glaciers, the glittering Konkan coast and the Western Ghats, and everything that comes in between. The India Chalo podcast is here to uncover it all for you and give you, our listeners, a sneak peek into what India has to offer for your next trip. Stay tuned. Hello there, fellow travelers. Namaste and welcome to a brand new episode of the India Chalo podcast. I'm your host, Rohan. I'm so excited that you all are here because in this episode, we are going somewhere really special and beautiful up in North India. We are going to India's last village. If you haven't guessed it already, it's Chitkul, a quaint little village tucked away in the Himachals that's one of the most sought after destinations for travelers in India today. In this episode, we talk about everything you could do in Chitkul, the treks, the natural landscape, the people, the culture, the food, and everything you can plan your trip around when you visit Chitkul in your trip to North India. And here to talk about her experience in Chitkul is Niyati Saxena. Niyati is returning for another episode on the India Chalo podcast. She was a guest back in season 1 of the show and left a big impact on all our listeners back then. And she's come back on the show to talk about her experience in Chitkul. Something about Niyati. Niyati is a trip leader and writer. She has led trips for over 3 years and taken over 700 people to locations across India and Southeast Asia. And you can now join Niyati in an adventure to travel across India and try out new experiences with her own travel company, Migrant Musings and Co, which I highly recommend that you check out for your next trip in India. You can connect with her on Instagram at Migrant Musings. We'll link it in the show notes for this episode. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Niyati. She's a fantastic storyteller and a great traveler to be around. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Without further ado, here's Niyati Saxena. I am here with Niyati Saxena. Niyati, welcome back to the India Chalo podcast. Super excited to have you back and host you again. So welcome to the show and looking forward to hearing about another one of your adventures again.
Hi, Rohan. So good to be here. Thank you for having me, actually. Really excited to, have a conversation with you again and share some more travel stories with a bunch of travel enthusiasts.
Amazing. Looking forward to that. Now, before we dive deep into your adventures, I will have introduced you before our interview, but one thing that you created a lot of impact on a previous episode. So I just wanted to ask two very common questions that come my way when they hear your episode is, what made Niyati a trip leader? And mujhe bhi trip leader banna hai. How can I become a trip? So help the audience answer those two questions and tell us more about what is your background and how can people go about, following the passion?
Correct. Okay. So nice to know that. Yeah, I think these are questions that I actually come across a lot of times. By qualification, I'm actually a lawyer, but I was practicing law and I found the legal industry to be extremely, toxic in the sense that it wasn't something that I quite resonated with. And, my whole life, because my father was in the Air Force, so my whole life I'd moved around, explored new places, met new people. It was something that I was used to. In fact, living in one place for a long amount of time was not normal for me. That was something that I found odd. Moving places, meeting new people, making new bonds, that was my version of normal. So trip leading in that sense made a lot of sense to me. And the travel company I work for called On His Own Trip, I'd actually, one of my friends had traveled with that company and I ended up traveling with them too. And then it so happened I had actually never applied or something for a job, but they reached out to me saying that, listen, we think you have the personality type for this and maybe you'd be good at it. So why don't you give it a shot? And then that's how about 3 years ago from today, I ended up leading my first trip. And the moment I did my first trip itself, I just knew that that's something I love so much that I'd want to do it for a very, very long time in life. And that's how I am here today. And as for anyone else wanting to become a trip leader, there are a whole bunch of travel companies out there that organize group trips for people across India. There are different sort of travel companies. There are companies that do purely luxury travel. Then there are companies that do only treks. There are female only travel groups. So you need to first identify the sort of group that you're interested in. And then you can start reaching out to them, maybe travel with them, apply to them, do a couple of, different activities to sort of gauge whether or not you're the right fit for this. And yeah, I hope if this is something that really excites someone, I hope they get to do it.
Amazing. I'm sure this will inspire a lot of listeners to, at least explore their passion and, find out what they could do in this space. So thank you for sharing that, Niyati. Now, for those who are listening in for the very first time, Niyati, also introduce yourself in your own words. I will have done it before the interview, but in your own words, why don't you tell our listeners where you're from and what brings you to travel?
Sure. So, hi everyone. Thank you for listening in today. My name is Niyati and I'm a trip leader by profession. What I mean by a trip leader is I take groups of strangers on trips across locations. That's that's in India, Southeast Asia, Europe, everywhere across the world. We take people on trips to different places. We have them explore offbeat destinations to popular destinations, try out different experiences, meet new people, and make friends and memories for a lifetime. So I'm a trip leader and I'm also a writer. I also do writing on the side. And yeah, that's about me.
Amazing, Yati. Thanks so much for sharing. And tell us which place are you taking us to today and reliving your experience?
So today we're actually going to be going to India's last village, India's last village near the Tibet border, and the village is named Chitkul.
Amazing. I've heard so many good things about it. Like it's a quaint village in Himachal. So
Correct.
I am super excited to hear your take on it. But tell us what drew you to Chitkul in the first place. Like what aspects of Chitkul do you find most mesmerizing and drew you to explore it more?
Okay. So I think the first thing is that itself, right? When you say it's India's last village, it's something that really intrigues you. Plus, I think the name Chitkul, I've taken different people to the destination, and 9 out of 10 times people tell me they've never heard of the name. They've never heard this name before. And I think that's the most intriguing part that, there is a place in our own country where we've been living for so long that we have no clue about. So it was that. And plus, when I had first visited Chitkul had no network at that point of time. Oh. So it was super exciting, to leave the digital world and actually enter a space where, you'd just be cut off. So, after a point of time, your phones will shut down. You can't make calls, you can't post stories, you can't be doing any of that. You just sit and talk to each other. And I think that was the charm of Chitkul that really drew me to the place.
Wonderful. So a truly solitude, you can say true solitude sort of vacation Chitkul is for you. So amazing. So what time of the year did you visit? And tell us about the weather. Like what would you recommend? Which part of the year do travelers visit Chitkul?
Okay, so Chitkul is a place that people typically cover during their Spiti circuit, and at that time it is a destination where people just do an overnight halt and then they proceed. That's how I had also stumbled upon Chitkul in the first place. However, frankly speaking, Chitkul is very beautiful and it deserves more time than just an overnight halt, which is why I suggest to people that instead of combining it in your Spiti trip, keep your Spiti trip separate and plan your Chitkul trip also separate, because Chitkul definitely deserves a little more of your time. Now, Chitkul, as I mentioned, it's a very, very remote destination. They do have mobile network in today's time, thanks to Jio, which has reached everywhere. But in other aspects, it's still extremely remote. I had visited the place in March when, there is still a lot of snow. In fact, last year in March, we even encountered snowfall over there. And when I say snow, I'm talking about a lot of snow, like the temperature touches about -3 degrees, -5 degrees at night. It's really, really cold. So Chitkul is not a destination that I'd recommend to people to visit in the months of December, January, February, because at that time it's much, much colder. It's better if you're looking to visit Chitkul in the snow season, then consider visiting it in March or April, when you can see snow also, but it's still decent enough that you can move around. Or if you're looking to see the green side of Chitkul, then you can visit it in the post-monsoon monsoon time, which is in the months of September and October.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. And is it like, have you seen travelers visit other parts of the year also? Because it's usually a bit less touristy. So do you also recommend like people go like around June or something, June, July?
So June, July is the monsoon season, and because of the monsoon, it will be. I mean, while it will be lush green, it will be very pretty. But considering movement, I think it will not be that great an idea because see, if you're going for a limited amount of time, if you're not a frequent traveler, if you're fighting for those limited leaves in your corporate office and then going, then at least you'd want to be able to make the most of your trip. Which, if you do in a monsoon time, it may be a little bit limiting because you'd be a little restricted in terms of what you can or cannot do.
Understand. Awesome. Okay, so March is probably the ideal time, March or April. Now let's dive deep into an itinerary. Tell us about where you started from. So imagine you started from Delhi and took a bus to Manali, I guess?
No. So from Delhi, you can start, or if you're living, I mean, for people from NCR, of course, you can start from Delhi and then proceed to Narkanda. From people from outside of Delhi, if you're planning to fly in, I would actually recommend that you fly into Chandigarh because that reduces your travel time by about 5 to 6 hours. You don't have to make the journey from Delhi to Chandigarh. You can start your journey from Chandigarh itself. From Chandigarh, you then proceed to Narkanda. Now, you have the option, you can even proceed to Shimla, but since Shimla is very touristy and very commercial, if you would like to avoid that, then it's actually better that you first proceed to Narkanda, do a day's halt in Narkanda. From Narkanda, you can also do the Hatu Peak hike, which is what we typically cover in our group trips because Hatu Peak hike is very beautiful. It's an ancient temple that you get to visit. And from the top of the temple, you actually get to witness a beautiful Himalayan mountain range, which is a stunning sight to take in. So I would actually recommend that one day you land, then that day you proceed to Narkanda. You'd reach Narkanda by about evening or night time, have your dinner, get some rest. The next day you do the Hatu Peak hike, witness a gorgeous sunset, take in the sight of the mountain range. And the third day is when you actually drive down to Chitkul.
Okay, great. So a nice warm up before you actually visit the place and explore around. So also that's great. So when you arrive in Chitkul, so are there a lot of hostels or hotels there? Tell us about what sort of places can travelers visit. So are there homestays or hostels, or where do you recommend travelers stay there while they're there?
Okay. So in terms of hostels, there's only Zostel over there. But yeah, since Zostel is the leading favorite for backpackers, I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to know that Zostel has reached Chitkul as well. Other than that, there are a lot of homestays and hotels over there. There is a property called Sama, which is as such considered the best in Chitkul, which is where we usually stay. Also, I'd like to inform listeners that if you're going during the snow season, which is the month of March and April, because if the snow, the conditions over there are so harsh that the pipes actually freeze. So if you're going to Chitkul, you better be a rugged traveler because you're not going to get running water over there. It's not the sort of place where you're going to get running hot water and, geyser and all of that. All of those comforts have to be left at home in order to go witness a place this remote, right? It's near the border. So these are things that I'd like someone to be prepared with before they actually go ahead and check out this place.
Got it. Okay, great. Okay, so you've arrived in Chitkul, and to walk us through what you would do, let's say, over a weekend or an extended weekend in Chitkul. Walk us through your itinerary for Chitkul.
Correct. So you can do it over an extended weekend. Yes. So as I mentioned, the first day you land in Chandigarh, you proceed to Narkanda. The second day you do your hike to Hatu Peak. The third day is when you arrive in Chitkul. So once you've arrived in Chitkul, again, it's a relatively decent journey from Narkanda to Chitkul. It takes about 8 to 10 hours to complete. So by the time you would reach, you would be a little tired. I'd suggest that you check in and just go visit Baspa River because the riverside in Chitkul is absolutely stunning. In fact, if any of you would Google the name Chitkul, the first thing that you're going to see is, beautiful images of the riverside in itself. And that river is called Baspa. So I would suggest that on that day, you just go and sit by the river and take in your surroundings because it's absolutely mesmerizing. Wow. On day 4 is when you can go about exploring the place a little bit. So then there is a temple called Mathi Temple, which is an ancient temple, which is believed to have relics of of a goddess over there who was passing through the land, and then she discovered a couple of lands that were in need of water, so she appointed chieftains in different villages, and that's how the place came to be. And so the local villagers have a lot of reverence for the temple because they believe that that is what actually revives their way of life over there. So on your fourth day, when you're in Chitkul, you should definitely go and pay your respects at the Maki temple. After that, you can proceed to the village of Sangla, which is about 45 minutes to 1 hour drive from Chitkul. In Sangla, there is an ancient fort from the 15th century. It is known as Kamru Fort. You must visit Kamru Fort because firstly, they pay respects to Lord Badrinath. But in the interesting part about visiting this fort is, right, when you visit the fort, they have you wear the local Himachali cap, they have you tie a ribbon around your waist. So it's not just that you're visiting a place, it's that they also tell you about their custom and they make you a part of the custom itself. So it goes beyond the regular visit because you also get to participate in how the custom is actually, followed in the local land. So then you can visit Kamru Fort and then come back to Chitkul, where you must also visit Hindustan Ka Akhri Dhaba, which is which is quite fascinating to hear because that's what it's called. It's Hindustan Ka Akhri Dhaba, where a very sweet old uncle and auntie will make you the yummiest plate of rajma and curry for you to feast on in the cold, biting, windy temperatures of the land.
That sounds so amazing. Okay, go on.
Yeah, so that is that. And then on the next day, as you are departing from Chitkul, you can also proceed to Rakcham, where there is, the glacier for you to go visit. You can go, but the glacier is not always accessible, so that's something you need to be prepared for. That you may or may not get to visit the glacier depending on the situation at that point of time. And then you can bid farewell to Chitkul and leave. But I'm telling you this now that right now also, if you think about it, you may feel that there isn't a lot to do in Chitkul, but the reality is the place in itself is so pretty, right? Once you walk around Chitkul, you'll just realize that you don't need too much activity in that place. It's the sort of place that it's so stunning to just look at that you'll just go and sit by the riverside, and that in itself will make you feel so complete, because I've heard this so many times from travelers who come with us on these trips that, just the sight of Baspa River in itself and just the sight of the snowy peaks in Chitkul, it's so beautiful that people are willing to take out that 1 week from their life to just go and visit that place.
That's so good. I think there's a good combination of both scenery, treks, as well as the local temples, the local culture, and whatnot. So I think that itself is an amazing testimony to the entire place and why travelers should visit. So Niyati, tell us more about the local culture there. So you mentioned that it's the last village. So is it more inspired by Tibetan culture, or what sort of culture did you see while you were there?
Okay, so it is still a little more inspired by the local Himachali culture itself.
Okay.
But yeah, because of their location, it is rather remote, the houses over there, like the local houses, are still built of wood. So they are very tiny, you can't even call them cottages. They're very tiny, tiny sheds, and they're absolutely built of wood. And it's interesting because you'll see these houses that have logs after logs lined up, and you'll see like a small Tata Sky dish hanging from somewhere.
Yeah.
And each of the houses have like logs of wood lined outside of them because A, that is their major source of income, and B, you need the constant supply of wood to keep yourself warm also, right? This is a place where a lot of people can't even afford to keep heaters running at all times. Even the hotels that do keep heaters keep them on for a limited amount of time because things can have a short circuit and react in a certain way very quickly. Then one thing very interesting to observe about the culture over there, which I've noticed each time, is so when you visit the Mathi temple, right, outside the temple, there is a little village complex where I've noticed in multiple occasions that the men folk of the village sit together, and they're from different ages, like the old men, middle-aged men, and they seem to be sharing stories. So I asked a local, and they told me that this is a very common practice in villages in the Kinnaur district of Himachal, that the men come to sit together every evening. They share stories from their own experiences, they share stories from the villages, from the elders of the village, and it is a way of passing down the custom through this act of conversing with each other, which I think is a beautiful thing to do, because if you think about it, more than textbooks, you end up remembering the stories you come across, right? And this is a practice that you'll find in a lot of villages in Kinnaur.
Amazing, amazing. So any particular interactions that you found with the people that left a mark on you in terms of the local culture there, or just the people in general? How are they to travelers? And tell us more about your experiences there.
Oh, absolutely. So, firstly, the people there are really, really warm, especially the hotel that we stayed at in Sama Resort, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
They're extremely warm. I mean, they're so particular about looking after their guests that even if you tell them that they can prepare the food and you'll come and have it in a bit, they will wait till you're seated because they want you to have hot food. So, the resort manager over there, Jaswinder ji, he's a very sweet old man. He told me once, he said, Beta ji, thand mein aaye hain, you've come to the cold. It's going to be freezing in any case. The least I can do for you is give you hot food. So, yeah, so which was very touching because that is the level of hospitality they have. Then another time, once we were headed to the Kamru Fort in Sangla village, which is when we came across, this marriage troupe that was passing by, this wedding troupe. So a young boy and girl from the village had got married off and they were proceeding. And it was interesting to see, that the boy was also equally adorned, which is not something that you can normally come across. So, they were both wearing these colorful attires and they had their rosy cheeks and they were smiling. And at that time, there was an old lady whom we started interacting with. So at that point, the people in my group who were traveling with us, they told her very eagerly that, Auntie, you're so lucky. You get to live in a place so beautiful and you get to call such a stunning place your home. And at that time, she said, she turned around and asked a question which made so many of us think, because she said that, child, am I lucky or are you the lucky one? Because I was born here. I studied here, I got married off here, and now I have my grandchildren here. So, yes, this place is beautiful, but I have lived here my whole life. Meanwhile, you get to come and greet me. And then another week or another month, you will be in some other village talking to some other auntie from some other place. So, I think that conversation with her left a mark on all of us because, how they say that the grass is always greener on the other side. And I think a lot of times while traveling, we get so enamored by a place that we only see the beauty of it, but we forget to understand the struggles or the hardships or the other side that the people actually living in a place have to face.
Yeah, that's truly what traveling is, right? It's all about mingling in with the local culture and actually being a part of it to experience how the people in other cities or other villages or other cultures live. So I think that's wonderful that you share that. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. And Rohan, one more thing I would like to add is, so for anyone who's really intrigued by, cultural aspects while traveling, something very interesting that people would find is to travel to this destination during Holi, because in Kinnaur, they have a very unique celebration of Holi. It's called Faguli. Faguli is a festival that they celebrate over a period of 4 days. And on the third day of the festival of Faguli is when they actually celebrate Holi. Now, when I say this is unique is because their practice isn't just to play with color. It's a celebration of a very elaborate kind. There are local skits that are performed. People are dressed up as local gods and goddesses. There are processions. There is dancing involved on the drums. Songs are sung in the local language. So you see the entire village come to life. Now in Chitkul, unfortunately, they have still kept, unfortunately or not, it's perfectly their choice, which we must respect. Yeah. But they do not let the tourists get involved in the celebration of the festival. But if you go to Sangla, which I mentioned is just 45 minutes from Chitkul, in Sangla, there are parts of the village that do allow the tourists and travelers to also become a part of this Fagoli festival. So if you're someone who's really intrigued by the cultural aspects, I think witnessing Holi in Sangla would be something that a lot of people could really enjoy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, that's very interesting, and I think will give a lot of listeners a sneak peek into the cultural aspect as well. So, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting. So, Nidhi, we talked a lot about spending, let's say, 3 or 4 days in and around Chitkul. What sort of budget would you recommend to, let's say, a budget traveler who's visiting for the very first time? For the entirety of the trip. So, tell us what budget would you recommend for travelers here?
I think, if you're going all the way to Chitkul, I would recommend at least keeping 5 to 6 days in hand. While I understand you would spend only 3 days in Chitkul, but like I said, that you visit Narkanda first and then on your drive back also, it's not something I recommend to people that, you pick up your bags from Chitkul and straight away drive down to Chandigarh airport to catch your flight, because honestly, that's about a 15, 16 hours drive. It's so tiring, it will ruin your experience. So I would recommend to people that they spread their travel across places. Go to Narkanda, land in Chandigarh, go to Narkanda, spend 2 days there. Then from there, proceed to Chitkul, spend 3 days there. And maybe on your last day, you can head back. If not to Shimla, you can head back to Shimla. And if you're not looking to head back to Shimla, maybe you can go stay in Mashobra or one of the smaller places near Shimla. And then on the 6th day, you fly out. So if you choose to follow this itinerary of at least 6 days to make your travel experience a little more well-rested, well-rounded, and wholesome for you, then you can easily do this in a budget of, let's say, about 18 to 20,000 rupees.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I think all our budget travelers, listeners will be seeing this as music to their ears. So amazing, amazing, awesome. So. Niyati, tell us about any advice you would give travelers who are visiting for the very first time, because I imagine it's at a very high altitude and there are a few things that you need to take care of while you're going there. So walk us through any advice or tips that you would recommend travelers to keep in mind.
Sure. So this is something that I tell travelers all the time, that please stay hydrated. What tends to happen is when we're doing road journeys around these locations, a lot of times people feel that, oh, I don't have access to a good washroom. And that's why they curtail their amount of drinking water, which is not good, because the moment that you're at such an altitude, like the village of Chitkul is located at 11,000 feet. So imagine you're going to be living at 11,000 feet within, surrounded by snow near a river. So it's very windy also. You're going to be living at that altitude for a bunch of days. So it's not a good idea for you not to be hydrated. So please stay hydrated, guys. You can figure out your washroom situation one way or the other, but remember to stay hydrated. Another thing that I always recommend is in your backpack. A lot of times in places it might feel sunny, so you may feel like you don't need your woolens at the time. But in your backpack, whenever you're stepping out, always keep, your woolen cap, woolen gloves, and an extra pair of socks. Okay, so socks, this is a hack that I use all the time. If you feel really cold, if you're already wearing socks, you can wear an extra pair of socks to feel warm. But if your hands are feeling cold, then on top of your gloves also you can wear woolen socks to keep your hands really warm. So your socks can work as your socks or your gloves both. So that is also again very helpful. One more thing to remember is if you're traveling to these destinations during the snowy season, it may be a good idea for you to get a heating rod. You have those heating rods that can heat up your water. I think that is just something that can make your experience much more comfortable, because if you don't have access to running water, the hotel staff does give you water, but it's really, really cold. So if you have a heating rod, it takes you 10 minutes and keeps your access to usable water that much easier.
Wonderful. Okay, awesome. I think I could have used some of these trips when I went to beer billing in December. So thank you for sharing. I'll keep that in mind for my next
trip. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay, Niyati, this is a rapid fire round. We talked about different places to visit and so on and so forth. But tell us the top 3 highlights that no one should miss while you're on the route from Chandigarh to Chitkul or vice versa.
Okay. So one is, of course, sitting by Baspa River in Chitkul. I think that's a sight that I'll never get out of my eyes, So one is sitting by Baspa River. Second would be having a plate of hot rajma at Hindustan ka Akhri Dhaba. And the third would be paying your respects at Kamru Fort in Sangla.
Wonderful. I think you had me at Rajma Chawal, but
Right? Imagine in that cold, biting temperature, getting a plate of yummy or hot rajma chawal it's absolute perfection.
I can just imagine. Yeah, yeah. I can't wait. All right, Niyati, this might you already might have the answer to this because you are a trip leader. But tell our listeners where your next trip is going to be, and tell us where you're coming from now. I think we were talking before the interview, so tell us where you're coming from now or where you're going next.
Okay, so coincidentally, guys, I'm actually returning from Chitkul itself after having celebrated Holi there. And we had the most amazing time. We had a great time. In fact, our WhatsApp group right now also involves everyone on the group saying that, I don't feel like working. I'm missing Chitkul, want to be back in Chitkul. So I have just returned from Chitkul. I will be heading to Tawang in April,
Wow.
which is in Arunachal Pradesh. I'm very excited to head back over there. And as for the people who find Chitkul super interesting, I will also be heading to Chitkul in the end of April. So if by the time this episode is out, you happen to hear it and you're really keen, you can join me on an adventure to Chitkul in April end.
Amazing, amazing. We'll link all those descriptions in the show notes for people who want to discover more and follow Niyati's adventures. So, Niyati, thanks so much for coming on to the India Chalo podcast. It was super, super amazing to have you and listening to your experiences. I had a wonderful time. So, for those listeners who want to keep up with your adventures going forward or want to understand more about your journey in the past, tell us where you are on social media or where can listeners catch up with you.
Sure. So you can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Migrant Musings. You can follow me on Instagram over there. And I'm also a feature writer for Tripoto. So you can check me out on Tripoto. The name is again Niyati Saxena, Migrant Musings. So I'd be happy to get in touch with people, maybe share some travel stories, travel tips, whatever people like.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks so much, Niyati, for coming on to the India Chalo podcast. I hope to see you again after another trip very soon. And for the meantime, thank you so much for coming on and sharing experiences. I'm sure listeners would have a wonderful time reliving them and also planning to visit Chitkul very soon.
Thank you so much, Rohan, for having me. It's always great conversing with you and seeing, the level of enthusiasm and energy with which you do this. I hope you also join me on a trip someday. And yeah, we get to take our travel stories forward then.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
If you enjoyed my conversation with Niyati, do leave us a rating on Spotify, iTunes, or Google Podcasts. It helps us reach to as many travelers around the world as we possibly could. We are also on Instagram @India Chalo. Tag us in your travel stories, leave us a message, and tell us your travel experiences across India. We love to talk travel all day, every day. And I look forward to seeing you here for the next episode of the India Chalo podcast. Stay tuned.